Samantha Richards stood in her pristine kitchen, arranging white roses in a crystal vase, when she heard Jackson's voice drift from the living room. His tone was different, hushed, almost secretive, and it made her pause, stem halfway to water. "No, Mom, she doesn't know yet," he whispered. "I want it to be a surprise." At 34, Samantha had built her career as an architectural designer by paying attention to details others missed, the way stress fractures appeared in concrete, how foundations could look solid from the surface while crumbling underneath. Now, arranging flowers for their 5th anniversary party, she felt that same instinct prickling. She moved closer to the doorway, Jackson's voice becoming clearer. "I've been thinking about it for months. Tonight feels like the perfect time to announce it." A pause. "Trust me, she'll adjust. She always does." Samantha's grip tightened on the rose stem, a thorn drawing blood. "She always does." How many times had she heard those words? How many times had she been expected to adjust, accommodate, adapt? Jackson appeared in the kitchen doorway, phone tucked away, his smile bright and oblivious. "The flowers look beautiful. Sam, you've outdone yourself." "Thank you." She sucked the blood from her finger, studying her husband's face. After 7 years together, she knew when he was hiding something. "Who was that?" "Just Mom, checking on tonight." And he kissed her cheek, smelling of coffee and the cologne she'd bought him last Christmas. "She's excited about the party." Excited. Samantha thought of her mother-in-law, Sylvia's particular brand of excitement, the kind that usually involved rearranging other people's lives to suit her preferences. "What surprise were you talking about?" Samantha asked carefully. Jackson's expression flickered, almost imperceptibly. "Surprise. I heard you mention wanting something to be a surprise." "Oh, that," he waved dismissively. "Just the anniversary toast. You know how Mom likes her dramatic moments." But Samantha had spent 5 years learning to read between the lines of Jackson's deflections. Some foundations looked solid until you dug deeper, and tonight, she suspected, they'd be doing some serious excavation. The first time Samantha met Sylvia Thomas, she'd been charmed. Jackson had been nervous, adjusting his tie 3 times during the drive to his mother's house, but Sylvia had greeted them with warmth that seemed genuine. "Finally, I get to meet the woman who's captured my special boy's heart," Sylvia had said, pulling Samantha into a perfumed embrace. The dining room table groaned under homemade lasagna, fresh bread, and a chocolate cake that could have fed 20 people. "Jackson's told me you're an architect," Sylvia continued, pouring wine with generous hands. "How fascinating. Though I imagine it's quite demanding work." "Architectural designer," Samantha corrected gently. "And yes, I love the challenge." "Oh, of course." Sylvia's smile never wavered. "I'm sure you'll find the right balance when children come along." "Jackson's always wanted a house full of little ones, haven't you, sweetheart?" It was subtle, the assumption, the redirection, the way Jackson's preferences became the centerpiece of every conversation. At the time, Samantha had dismissed it as a mother's natural pride in her son. The warning signs accumulated slowly, unannounced visits that always seemed to happen when Samantha was at her busiest. Sylvia's critical eye scanning their apartment, her finger running along windowsills to check for dust, the way she'd rearrange items in their kitchen cabinet to be more efficient, claiming Jackson had always preferred his coffee mugs organized by size. "I've been doing it this way for him since he was 12, Sylvia would say when Samantha gently mentioned they had their own system. After they married and bought their house, the intrusions intensified. Sylvia had opinions about their furniture arrangement, their garden choices, and especially Samantha's cooking. Nothing was ever quite right, but her criticisms came wrapped in concern. "I'm sure Jackson doesn't mind takeout 3 times a week," she'd say, spotting containers in the refrigerator. "When his father worked long hours, I still managed a home-cooked meal every night. But then, I wasn't trying to manage a career, too." And Jackson's response was always the same apologetic smile and familiar refrain, "That's just how Mom is. She means well." But meaning well. Samantha had learned. could be its own form of violence, death by 1,000 small cuts, each one justified by good intentions. 3 months ago, Samantha had overheard a conversation that changed everything. She'd been bringing dessert plates to the kitchen during a family barbecue when Sylvia's voice drifted from the patio. "I'm worried about Jackson." Sylvia was telling his Aunt Carol, "Samantha works such long hours, and their house shows it. I stop by to help when I can, but it's not the same as having someone dedicated to creating a proper home." "Have they talked about children?" Carol asked. "She always says someday," Sylvia replied, her voice heavy with disapproval. "But you know what that means for career women. I've been thinking it might be best if I sold my house and moved in with them. Jackson wouldn't have to eat takeout all the time, and I could create the kind of home environment he deserves. Do you think Samantha would be okay with that?" "Jackson can convince her," Sylvia said confidently. "He knows I only want what's best for them. Besides, with me there to handle the household, maybe Samantha would finally feel free to focus on starting a family." Samantha had stood frozen in the kitchen, dessert plates clutched against her chest, as the full scope of her mother-in-law's plans became clear. This wasn't about downsizing or being closer to family. This was about replacing her, making her irrelevant in her own marriage. That night, lying awake beside Jackson's sleeping form, Samantha had made a decision. She needed options. She needed her own foundation. The next morning, she'd called in sick for the first time in years and spent the day researching properties for 2 weeks. Samantha maintained her normal routine while secretly viewing properties after work. She told Jackson she was working late on a major sustainable housing project, which wasn't entirely a lie, just a creative interpretation of what constituted a project. Most of the houses she saw felt wrong, too big, too expensive, too close to their neighborhood. She wasn't looking for a palace or a statement. She needed sanctuary. Then she found the cottage. 20 minutes from downtown, nestled on a 1/4-acre lot with mature oak trees. It was perfect in its imperfection. The 1950s bungalow needed outdated electrical, a kitchen that hadn't been touched since the Carter administration, and bathroom tile that belonged in a time capsule. But the bones were good, and standing in the main room with afternoon light streaming through tall windows, Samantha could see exactly what it could become. Am I planning an escape or building strength? The question haunted her as she walked through the rooms a second time. The answer, she realized, was both or neither. She was creating choices. The seller accepted her offer that afternoon. When she signed the papers 3 days later, her hand trembled only slightly as she wrote her name only on the deed, my choice only. Maintaining her double life required elaborate choreography. Samantha developed a system. Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays were cottage nights. She'd text Jackson about working late, drive to the property, and spend 3 hours with contractors, making decisions that were entirely her own. The close calls came frequently. Jackson offering to pick her up from work when her car was supposedly in the shop. Contractor business cards falling from her purse. Dana, her best friend, growing increasingly suspicious about these mysterious late nights. "You're glowing," Dana observed over lunch one Tuesday. "Either you're having an affair or you've discovered the fountain of youth. Which is it?" "Just a really exciting project at work." Samantha deflected. "Since when do zoning permits make you glow?" The confrontation came 3 weeks later. Donna cornered her in the firm's break room, arms crossed, expression serious. "What aren't you telling me?" Dana demanded. "And don't say work. I called your office last night at 7. You weren't there." Samantha stared into her coffee cup, calculating. Dana had been her closest friend since college, the maid of honor at her wedding, the person who'd held her hair during food poisoning and her hand during her father's funeral. "If I tell you something, can you promise not to judge me? Have I ever?" Samantha took a breath and told her everything. The cottage, the renovations, the growing certainty that her marriage was slowly suffocating her. When she finished, Dana was quiet for a long moment. "You're not leaving him," Dana said finally. "You're preparing to save yourself." "Exactly." "Good. Dana squeezed her hand. "It's about time." Over the following months, Samantha watched her cottage transform. The outdated kitchen became an open, airy space with butcher block countertops and farmhouse sink. The cramped living room opened into a bright, welcoming area with built-in bookshelves. Every decision from paint colors to light fixtures was purely hers. The renovation process became therapy. Standing in the hardware store, choosing between cabinet pulls, she felt a freedom she'd forgotten existed. No one questioned her choices or suggested alternatives that would better suit someone else's preferences. There were moments of doubt. Late-night calls from Jackson, asking when she'd be home, made her feel guilty about the deception. Seeing his confused hurt when she claimed to be too tired to talk about her work projects made her question whether she was being fair. But fairness, she'd learned, was a luxury she could no longer afford. "This isn't about the house," she told herself one evening, standing in her nearly completed kitchen. "It's about remembering who I am." The closest call came 6 weeks before their anniversary. Jackson had noticed an unusual route on their shared GPS app and asked about it over dinner. "You were out by Oakwood Hills yesterday," he said, not accusatory but curious. "Everything okay?" Samantha's heart hammered. "Client meeting," she said smoothly. "Potential sustainable housing development out that way." "I thought you said you were working late at the office." "Meeting ran long. Then I went back to finish up some drawings." Jackson nodded, seemingly satisfied, but Samantha saw a flicker of something in his expression. Suspicion, concern. She couldn't tell, and that uncertainty kept her awake that night. The paranoia grew alongside her confidence. Every time Jackson looked at her strangely, every unexpected question sent her pulse racing, but paradoxically, the more secretive she became about the cottage, the more honest she became with herself about her marriage. Standing in her completed home office, cottage deed safely locked in the filing cabinet, Samantha felt ready for whatever came next. Their anniversary dawned bright and clear, but Jackson seemed unusually nervous. He paced the kitchen while making coffee, took 2 phone calls he claimed were work-related, and kept checking his watch as if waiting for something. "Everything okay?" Samantha asked as he hung up from the second call. "Perfect," he said quickly. "Just excited about tonight." Sylvia arrived at 3 o'clock to help with preparations, though Samantha had specifically told Jackson she wanted to handle everything herself. Her mother-in-law swept through the house like a general inspecting troops, adjusting flower arrangements and rearranging appetizer platters. "I brought my famous spinach dip," Sylvia announced, unpacking containers from an oversized purse. "Jackson's always loved it." "Thank you," Samantha said through gritted teeth. "Though we have plenty of food?" "One can never have too much food for a celebration," Sylvia replied, claiming counter space in the kitchen. "Especially when there are changes coming." The comment hit like cold water. Changes. Sylvia's smile was enigmatic. "Oh, just life. You know how it is. Nothing stays the same forever." By 7 o'clock, 30 guests filled their home with warm chatter and clinking glasses. The caterers moved efficiently through the crowd, and Samantha's carefully curated playlist provided perfect background ambiance. Everything was going according to plan, except for the uncomfortable glances. Samantha noticed them gradually, the way Jackson's cousins kept looking between her and Sylvia, the whispered conversations that stopped when she approached, the forced quality of some people's smiles. Kyle's wife, Jennifer, appeared at Samantha's elbow during a lull near the bar. "Has Jackson talked to you about his mom's situation?" Jennifer asked quietly. "Situation." Jennifer's expression grew uncomfortable. "Oh, I thought... Kyle mentioned something about housing changes, and I assumed..." "What kind of housing changes?" Before Jennifer could answer, Jackson appeared with champagne flutes, interrupting the conversation. But the seed of dread had been planted, growing stronger as Samantha noticed more meaningful looks and half-finished sentences throughout the evening. Something was definitely planned. and she was definitely not part of it. Jackson called for attention as dessert was being served, raising his champagne glass with a broad smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "First, I want to thank everyone for coming tonight to celebrate 5 amazing years with this incredible woman," he began, his arm around Samantha's waist. "Samantha, you've made these the best years of my life." The crowd murmured appreciation, and Samantha felt a flutter of hope. Maybe she'd been imagining the tension. Maybe this was just Jackson being nervous about a romantic anniversary speech. "As many of you know," Jackson continued, "family means everything to us, which is why I'm so excited to share some news that makes tonight a double celebration." Samantha looked up at him, confused. They hadn't discussed any additional announcements. "My mother is moving in with us," Jackson declared. "After months of discussion, we've decided it makes the most sense for Mom to sell her house and come live here permanently. We have the space, and it'll be wonderful to have her close as we start thinking about the next chapter of our lives." The room seemed to tilt. Months of discussion. Next chapter. This was the first Samantha had heard of any of it. She maintained her smile through sheer force of will. But inside she was reeling. Across the room, Sylvia stood by the fireplace, practically glowing with triumph. When their eyes met, Sylvia raised her glass in a small, victorious salute. "When is this happening?" Dana asked carefully, clearly sensing the tension. "We're aiming for next month." Jackson replied confidently, "Mom's already accepted an offer on her house." Each word felt like a physical blow. Samantha stood frozen beside her husband. Her champagne glass clutched so tightly she feared it might shatter. "Samantha has been so supportive," Jackson added, giving her a squeeze that felt more like a vice. "Haven't you, honey?" All eyes turned to her. The moment stretched, everyone waiting for her response. Samantha forced herself to nod, not trusting her voice. Then Sylvia was there, gliding over with that familiar, condescending smile. "Isn't this wonderful?" she gushed. "It's like things are coming full circle. Now I can help around the house while Samantha focuses on her career. Plus, I'll be right here when grandchildren come along. Heaven knows you'll need the help with your work schedule." The implication burned. Before Samantha could respond, Sylvia leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper meant only for Samantha's ears. "You'll adjust, dear. You always do." In that moment, all of Samantha's careful planning crystallized into perfect clarity. The cottage keys felt warm in her purse, the deed a tangible reminder of the choices she'd created for herself. "Actually, Sylvia," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her, "I think we need to finish this conversation with Jackson present." Without waiting for a response, she moved to Jackson's side, gently touching his arm to interrupt his conversation with his uncle. "Jackson, we need to talk. All 3 of us." His brow furrowed. "Sure. We can step into the study." "No," Samantha interrupted. "This affects everyone here. You made your announcement publicly. I think it's appropriate that mine is public too." Confusion flashed across his face, but she was already turning to address their guests. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate with us tonight," she began, tapping her fork against her champagne glass until the room quieted. "As Jackson mentioned, we apparently have a double celebration happening. His mother moving in with us is certainly unexpected news to me." A murmur rippled through the room. Jackson stepped closer, concern evident in his expression. "Since tonight seems to be the night for surprises," Samantha continued, reaching into her purse, "I'd like to share one of my own." She pulled out the folder containing her cottage deed and the photos she'd carefully selected. Her heart pounded, but her voice remained clear. "For the past 4 months, I've been working on a special project. I purchased and renovated a small property near Oakwood Hills." She opened the folder and held up the first photo, the cottage's exterior with its freshly painted sage green door and flower boxes. "It's a beautiful space, completely designed to my specifications. No compromises, no adjustments to accommodate anyone else's preferences, just mine." Jackson stared at the photo, confusion evident on his face. "I don't understand. You bought a house without telling me?" "Yes," Samantha replied simply. "Just as you arranged for your mother to move into our home without consulting me." His face flushed. "That's different. She's family." "So am I, Jackson. Or at least, I thought I was." She turned back to their guests, who were watching with a mixture of discomfort and fascination. "In light of tonight's announcement, I'd like to make one of my own. Sylvia is indeed welcome to move in with Jackson, and I'll be moving to my new place." The silence that followed was absolute. Within minutes, guests began drifting toward the front door, murmuring awkward goodbyes and thank yous. Soon, only close family remained: Kyle and Jennifer, Jackson's sister Megan, and of course, Sylvia, who had recovered from her shock enough to find her voice. "This is ridiculous," Sylvia declared, reaching for the deed in Jackson's hands. "You can't possibly expect us to take this seriously. You're having a tantrum because you didn't get your way." Samantha intercepted her hand before she could grab the document. "That's exactly the problem. Sylvia, you've never taken me seriously. Neither of you have." "How dare you humiliate my son like this?" Sylvia hissed. "After everything he's done for you, this is how you repay his generosity." "Generosity," Samantha repeated. "Is that what we're calling it when someone makes unilateral decisions that affect both partners in a marriage?" "Mom," Jackson started, but Samantha cut him off. "Let me ask you something. Jackson, when exactly did you and your mother begin these months of discussion about her moving in? Because 3 months ago, you explicitly told me it would never happen." Jackson looked uncomfortable. "Things changed. Her house sold faster than expected." "Her house wasn't even on the market 3 months ago," Samantha interrupted. "You lied to me. You knew how I would react, so you and your mother made plans behind my back." "I was trying to spare your feelings," Jackson protested. "I know how difficult you can be about these things." "Stop speaking for my husband," Samantha said firmly to Sylvia, who had opened her mouth to defend Jackson. "That's part of the problem. You're constantly inserting yourself between us, and he lets you—" "Don't talk to my mother that way," Jackson snapped. "And there it is," Samantha said softly. "You'll defend her immediately, but where's that same defense when she undermines me?" The truth of her words seemed to register because Jackson's anger deflated slightly. Samantha pressed her advantage. "For 5 years, I've watched you prioritize her feelings over mine. When she rearranges our furniture without permission, you say she's helping. When she criticizes my cooking, my housekeeping, my career choices, you tell me she means well. When she shows up unannounced and expects to be accommodated, you say I'm overreacting." "That's not—" Jackson began. "It is," Samantha interrupted. "You've never once taken my side in those conflicts. You've expected me to adjust, accommodate, adapt. Well, I'm done adjusting." Sylvia stepped between them, literally inserting herself into their conversation. "Jackson was just trying to keep the peace. You've always been so sensitive about everything. And you've always been manipulative," Samantha shot back. "This whole moving in plan isn't about downsizing or being closer to family. It's about replacing me, making me irrelevant in my own marriage." "That's absurd," Sylvia sputtered, but her face had flushed red. Suddenly, Sylvia pressed her hand to her chest, her breathing becoming shallow. "I can't. My heart." Jackson immediately moved to support his mother. "Mom, are you okay? Should I call an ambulance?" Samantha watched the performance with cold eyes. "Really? Sylvia, a heart attack right now." "Samantha," Jackson said sharply. "She's having chest pains. She's having manipulation pains," Samantha replied. "Notice how quickly they'll disappear once she gets what she wants." As if to prove her point, Sylvia's breathing suddenly steadied. "I'm fine," she said weakly. "Just the stress of this whole situation." Samantha picked up her purse and the cottage photos, returning them to the folder. "I'm done being the accommodation committee," she said quietly. "Jackson, you have a choice to make. Marriage counseling, and your mother finds her own place. Or we're done." "That's an ultimatum," Jackson said. "No, it's a boundary. I'm no longer willing to be the third wheel in my own marriage." She headed for the door, but Jackson's voice stopped her. "Where are you going?" "To my cottage," she replied simply. "I think we all need some space to consider what happens next." As she opened the front door, she heard Sylvia's voice behind her. "This is ridiculous. Jackson, she's bluffing. She'll be back tomorrow once she calms down." Samantha didn't look back. She closed the door behind her, walked to her car, and drove away from the home that had ceased to feel like hers long ago. The cottage welcomed Samantha with quiet solitude. She dropped her overnight bag in the entryway and moved through the rooms, turning on lamps as she went. The soft lighting cast a warm glow over the spaces she had so carefully designed. For the first time that evening, she felt like she could breathe properly. Her phone buzzed constantly messages from Jackson, from Dana, from other friends who had witnessed the evening's drama. She wasn't ready to respond to any of them. Instead, she sat in the window seat she'd built into the living room, gazing out at the moonlit garden. The next few weeks fell into a routine. Samantha threw herself into work with renewed focus, earning praise for innovative designs that seemed to flow effortlessly from her pen. Her boss noticed the change during a project review. "Whatever's shifted in your personal life," she commented, "it seems to be fueling your creativity. This is some of your best work." The irony wasn't lost on Samantha. By stepping away from a situation that had diminished her, she had reclaimed parts of herself that had been slowly eroding. Jackson came by twice in the first week, standing awkwardly in her doorway like a stranger. They met for coffee at neutral locations, carefully discussing practical matters while dancing around deeper issues. "The house feels empty without you," he admitted during their third meeting. "How's your mother adjusting?" Samantha asked. His expression grew uncomfortable. She's actually moved in temporarily, just until she finds something permanent." "Of course she has." What Jackson didn't tell Samantha was how quickly the fantasy of living with his mother had crumbled. Within a week, Sylvia had rearranged his bedroom furniture to make space for her vanity, reorganized the kitchen according to her preferences, and begun a running commentary on every aspect of his daily routine. "You're eating too much takeout," she'd say, intercepting his Chinese food delivery. "I'll make you something proper." "I don't remember you being so messy," she'd comment, following him around with a dust cloth. "You should call Samantha and apologize. This has gone on long enough." But when Jackson mentioned boundaries during one of their counseling sessions he'd reluctantly agreed to individual therapy, Sylvia's reaction was swift and dramatic. "After everything I've sacrificed for you," she cried, "this is how you repay me, by choosing her over your own mother." "I'm not choosing Samantha over you," Jackson replied, his voice steadier than he felt. "I'm choosing my marriage." It was the first time he'd ever said no to his mother so directly, and the aftermath was both terrifying and liberating. The real test came 6 weeks into their separation. Jackson had a crucial counseling session scheduled, one where he planned to discuss setting concrete boundaries with his mother, when Sylvia called from the hospital emergency room. "I'm having chest pains," she sobbed into the phone. "The doctors are running tests. I need you here." Jackson stared at his phone, torn between lifelong conditioning and hard-won growth. His therapist's words echoed in his mind. Emotional emergencies that coincidentally occur during important moments are rarely genuine emergencies. "I'll call you back." "Mom," he said, "I need to finish something first." For the first time in his adult life, Jackson chose therapy over his mother's crisis. When he called the hospital 2 hours later, Sylvia's chest pains had mysteriously resolved, and she'd been discharged with a clean bill of health. The nurse he spoke with was honest when he pressed for details. Her tests were normal. Sometimes anxiety can mimic cardiac symptoms. Jackson hung up feeling a mixture of guilt and relief. He was finally learning to recognize manipulation, even when it wore the mask of medical emergency. The next 3 months were a careful dance of progress and setbacks. Jackson would make breakthroughs in counseling, then backslide when Sylvia applied pressure. He arranged for her to tour senior living communities, only to cancel when she claimed the stress was affecting her health. Samantha, meanwhile, had settled into cottage life with surprising contentment. She worked late without guilt, read books in her window seat, and slowly remembered who she was beneath all the accommodating and adjusting. Their coffee meetings gradually became dinners, then walks in the park. They were courting each other again, rediscovering compatibility without the constant undercurrent of tension. "Do you miss it?" Jackson asked one evening as they sat on her back porch. "Our house. Our life." Samantha considered the question carefully. "I miss what I thought our life was," she said finally. "I'm not sure I miss what it actually was." The honesty stung, but Jackson was learning to sit with discomfort instead of deflecting it. The breakthrough came when Sylvia attempted one final manipulation. She showed up at Jackson's school during his lunch break, tearful and dramatic, claiming she'd received an eviction notice from her temporary housing. "I have nowhere else to go," she sobbed. "You're all I have left." But Jackson had been in therapy long enough to recognize the pattern. He also knew that Sylvia's temporary housing was a month-to-month rental that she could leave at any time. "Mom," he said, gently but firmly, "I love you, but I won't be manipulated anymore. I found you 3 excellent senior living options. You need to choose one." "You're choosing her over me," Sylvia accused. "I'm choosing my marriage," Jackson replied. "If you can't respect that, then we'll need to limit our contact until you can." It was the firmest boundary he'd ever set, and while Sylvia tested it repeatedly over the following weeks, Jackson held steady. Eventually, grudgingly, she chose a senior community that offered independent living with optional social activities. The extended family, who had initially rallied to Sylvia's side, slowly began to understand the dynamics at play. Jackson's sister Megan was the first to voice what others were thinking. "I'm proud of you," she told Jackson privately. "Mom needed boundaries. We all knew it, but nobody wanted to be the bad guy." 6 months after their separation, Jackson sat in Samantha's cottage kitchen, helping her plan renovations for their main house. The conversation was collaborative in a way their discussions hadn't been in years. "What if we converted the guest room into a proper office for you?" he suggested, sketching a potential layout. "It has the best natural light." "What about when your mother visits?" Samantha asked. "Mom has her own place now," Jackson replied without hesitation. "If she visits, she can stay in a hotel like any other out-of-town guest. Our home is for us." Samantha smiled, hearing the certainty in his voice. They still had work to do, boundaries to reinforce, patterns to rewire, but they were building something authentic now, based on mutual respect rather than accommodation. The cottage would remain hers. They'd decided, not as an escape hatch, but as a reminder of her independence and strength. It might become a rental property someday or a weekend retreat. For now, it stood as tangible proof that she could create her own foundation. As they spread blueprints across her dining table, Samantha reflected on the journey that had brought them here. Standing up for herself had been terrifying, but necessary. Creating options had given her the strength to set boundaries, and those boundaries, painful as they were to establish, had ultimately saved their marriage rather than ending it. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. Those didn't exist in real life. But it was something better, an authentic relationship between 2 imperfect people committed to growing together rather than apart. Jackson reached across the table to squeeze her hand. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what? For not giving up on us. For being strong enough to fight for what we could be." Samantha squeezed back. looking around at the space she'd created her sanctuary, her proof of possibility. Sometimes the bravest thing you could do in a relationship was simply to say, "This isn't working for me anymore." And sometimes, if you were very lucky, that honesty became the foundation for building something better. Outside, the oak trees rustled in the evening breeze, and Samantha felt the deep satisfaction that comes from structures built to last, not because they never faced storms, but because they'd been designed to weather them. Their marriage, like her cottage, now stood on solid ground.